Mr. Holmes is present with his attorneys, Mr. King, Ms. Brady, Ms. Nelson, Ms. Hicks, and Ms. Spengler. And the people are represented by Mr. Brockler, Mr. Orman, Ms. Pearson, Mr. Edson, and Ms. Stitch McGuire. And we are outside the presence of the jury. Are the parties ready for the jury?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Brady?
Apparently not.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
The first witness we're calling this morning, her name is Tara Fournier, Fournier. And that's the witness, Ms. Teach McGuire raised the issue, can't remember if it was earlier this week or whenever.
It was 2 days ago. She's the trainer/recruiter from Marical?
Correct. And the court ruled that Ms. Fournier could not say that she thought Mr. Holmes was autistic. I was thinking about that issue in preparation for Ms. Fournier, and I feel like I should tell the court, Ms. Fournier has 2 sons who are autistic, and so this is the basis of her knowledge. And then when she was working with Mr. Holmes, she recognized symptoms that she thought looked like things she sees in her son. So I was wondering, A, if we establish that, whether that changes the court's mind, or B, whether she could say, at least say that she has 2 sons who are autistic, and when dealing with Mr. Holmes, it reminded her of dealing with her sons, the sort of vacant look, the non-responsive, non-eye contact, and those type symptoms. So I was wondering if I had any more leeway with that witness than what the court had previously ordered.
Whose witness is it on the prosecution side?
Your Honor, the fact that Ms. Fournier has 2 sons who are autistic doesn't change the fact that this is expert testimony. She's not qualified to render an opinion about whether or not the defendant, is autistic. And so I agree with the court that she could talk about her observations and the fact that he was introspective and shy, perhaps. She's absolutely not qualified in any way to render an opinion that he's autistic. And also, Your Honor, when I had originally made my objection, I had also stated, that people object on relevance grounds. And the court limited the people to a period of time where we could go into the defendant's past. This is way outside the scope of what the court limited the people. And so I don't understand the relevance.
Well, the relevance as to the time frame is untimely because there has already been evidence about this without objection, so I'm not sure I understand that objection at this time. The people have not raised any issues at all about this time frame or evidence related to this time frame being brought in. In terms of the other objection, I sustain the people's objection that it would be improper to allow this witness to opine that she thought Mr. Holmes was autistic and that her opinion was based on the fact that she has 2 sons who are autistic. I thought that was improper expert opinion testimony. This is different. This sounds like the defense wants her to testify that she observed some behaviors in Mr. Holmes that are consistent with behaviors that she has observed in her children, and that her children, she has knowledge that her children have been diagnosed as being autistic or with autism. That's as far as she can go, and I take Ms. Brady's request to go into exactly that. I think that's appropriate, but to go beyond that and offer any opinions that therefore she thought the defendant might have been autistic or anything like that, I think would be improper. Does that make sense? She can testify about her observations, and she can say, I observed this behavior, and his behavior was similar to the behavior that I observed in my children, and I'm aware that my children are diagnosed with autism, but she can't go beyond that. All right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there anything else before I bring the jury in?
No, sir.
Okay, let's bring the jury in, please. Please be seated, everyone. Good morning, members of the jury. How's everyone doing? Good. Just a scheduling note to start off. On Monday, July 6th, that's next Monday, we're going to start at 9 o'clock. One of you has an appointment, and so we're going to accommodate her schedule. So we'll plan on starting at 9. It's possible that she may be a little late and we may have to start at 9:05 or 9:10, but I think it's best to have you plan to be here by 9. Usually you get here around 8:15, 8:20 or so you can sleep in a little bit. You should still get here before 9 so that we're ready to go at 9 in case the one juror is able to be here by 9, okay? So maybe plan to be here around 8:45 or so, if that's okay with everyone. All right, great, thank you. All right, Ms. Brady, call your next witness, please.
Your Honor, we called Tara Fournier.
Good morning. Good morning. Could I have you raise your right hand so that I can administer an oath?
Yes.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Please be seated.
Thank you.
Please tell us your full name for the record and spell your first, middle, and last names.
My full name is Tara Ann Fournier, spelled T as in Tom, A-R-A, A-N-N-E, F as in Frank, O-U-R-N-I-E-R.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you please tell the jury where you worked in late 2010, early 2011?
Sure. I worked for Marical.
And what is Marical?
Marical is a vitamin and nutritional supplement manufacturing company.
Where is it located?
The headquarters are in Orange, California.
Did you have an opportunity to meet James Holmes?
Yes, I did.
And do you recognize him here at the table?
Yes, I do.
Can you explain to the jury how you came to meet Mr. Holmes?
Yes, I was in HR for Marical at the time, and I was doing recruiting and HR generalist work, and Mr. Holmes was coming to work. He was applying for a position, a temporary position.
And how did you very first meet him?
I very first met him when he came in to interview for a position.
Did you do the interview?
Yes, I did.
And did you, tell the jury what your observations were of Mr. Holmes at that time?
Sure. He was dressed very professionally. I remember specifically he was dressed in a button-up shirt and a tie. He was a little bit different, but he was able to answer all the questions and he fit the bill for the position.
And did you hire him?
I did hire him.
And what was his job at Marical?
He was a coding operator.
And what does that entail?
So a coding operator is when the vitamins and the pills were being manufactured, if there was a certain color or a certain texture that the pills needed to be, he was in the department where he was overseeing that process and making sure that the pills were colored according to the customer specifications.
Okay. And did he come in through a temp agency?
Yes.
Did you have any other interactions with Mr. Holmes?
Yes.
Can you describe those for the jury, please?
Sure. I interacted with him during his interview process, during his onboarding, so we had to train in order to get him up to speed for the position, and then also with an HR issue that occurred.
How long do you think you spent with Mr. Holmes in the interview process?
Probably about 30 minutes would be a guess.
Okay. And how long in while you're training him and getting him acclimated to the lab?
That would have been probably more like 2 hours.
All right. And then you said you also had some interaction with him during an HR issue?
Yes.
During these interactions, and we'll talk about that issue in a minute, but
Okay.
during all of your interactions with Mr. Holmes, what sort of impression did you have of him? What did you observe about him?
I observed him a little bit different
How so?
than others. It's hard for me to put into words. I guess he reminded me a lot of my children. He was very just he seemed like he wasn't all present all the time. I mean, not that he was not intellectual or intelligent, but just that he was in another place.
And why does that remind you of your children?
My children have some special needs.
And what is that special need?
I have 2 children, and my older son is diagnosed with Asperger's, and my younger son is diagnosed with autism.
And so what sort of things did Mr. Holmes do that reminded you of your children?
He did not make eye contact with people very easily, or with me, and he just seemed very socially awkward and just in another, I don't know how to explain, but in another place. Like his mind was not always present.
Did it
It
seem
appeared.
like he was just bored and shy, or did it seem more than that?
No, I wouldn't say bored and shy. I wouldn't say that.
Okay. Did he start up conversations with anyone that you saw?
Not that I observed.
Okay. Did he socialize with other employees?
I don't know. Not to my knowledge.
Right. And if you could just briefly explain what sort of interaction you had with Mr. Holmes during that HR issue, that human relations issue that you mentioned.
Sure. So while he was working in the coding area, it's a small space, and there's usually 2 people that work in the coding area and then a quality control person that comes in and out. And there was an issue where the quality control person felt that James was working too slowly and was prodding him to work more quickly, and one of the other employees stepped in and told the quality control person to stop, and it created a confrontation with some racial slurs.
Okay. Did the racial slurs have anything to do with Mr. Holmes?
No,
Not
no.
the victim or the perpetrator of the racial slurs, correct?
no, just a witness.
Okay. And so when you, what sort of interaction did you then have to have with Mr. Holmes regarding that issue you were investigating?
Sure. So whenever there's an issue, we would bring in anyone that had knowledge of the incident. So I brought him in and asked him some questions to clarify what had happened that day.
Okay. And the jury has heard from David Maldonado and Jose Sanchez. Were either of those 2 men involved in this incident you're describing?
No.
All right. So there were 2 completely different people.
Yes.
All right. What was your observation about the way Mr. Holmes presented when you were talking to him about the incident?
He had very little to say about it.
Okay.
You know, he answered questions very briefly, but really seemed to have no knowledge of what had happened.
Did he give any sort of narration about what happened, or was it just basically answering your questions?
Basically answering my questions.
And during that conversation, did he make good eye contact with you?
Not that I recall, no.
Was he ever rude or arrogant that you saw?
No.
Was he polite and nice?
Yes.
Okay. If I can have just a moment.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Fournier. The prosecution might have some witness
you.
questions for you.
Thanks.
Cross-examination, Ms. Stitch McGuire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's true that you had not met the defendant prior to his employment at Miracal prior to 2011. Is that true?
Yes.
And your interactions with the defendant were brief, potentially 3 to 4 hours over his entire term of employment at Miracal. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And you have not had any interaction with the defendant since his departure in January of 2011.
Yes.
And realizing that your interaction with the defendant in 2011 was a year and a half before the defendant was charged with the murders of 12 individuals and the attempted murders of 70 other individuals.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Your interaction with the defendant in last interaction in January of 2011 was over a year and a half before this defendant was charged with the murders of 12 individuals and the attempted murders of 70 more.
Yes.
And Your interactions with the defendant consisted of his initial hiring interview. Are people often nervous?
Hold on. Is that a yes?
Yes,
Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your interactions consisted of his initial hiring interview. Are people often nervous during an initial interview?
some people are nervous.
And the other issue was an HR investigation.
Yes.
Are people often nervous during an HR investigation?
Again, some people, yes.
And you're not a psychologist,
No.
not a psychiatrist.
No.
And what is your profession currently?
I'm in human resources.
Now, when you interacted with the defendant, did he appear to understand everything you said?
I believe yes.
And you thought the defendant was qualified, if not overqualified, to attain the job at Miracal when you hired him?
I believe he was qualified, yes.
Do you have very many applicants for this type of position with someone who is cum laude graduate of the University of California at Riverside?
Not specifically, no.
And you specifically looked for characteristics in the person you were hiring because you had had some employment issues with other employees at Miracal, so you were specifically looking for someone who would keep their head down and do a good job. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
So in the midst of the drama that was caused in this racial incident, didn't the defendant do exactly what you had hoped that employee in his position would do, which was to keep his head down and to not get involved in any of the drama?
I would say yes, but I also would say that in an investigation, we would expect them to cooperate and provide information relevant to the investigation.
And did he cooperate?
He did.
And in fact, you're not even the HR director of the facility where the defendant was located. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that is correct.
So there was an HR director who would have had more opportunity to interact with the defendant at Vista, which is the facility where he was actually employed.
Actually, there's no HR director in the Vista facility. It was an HR assistant.
But there was an HR assistant there at the Vista facility.
That is correct.
And you were located in the Orange County facility.
That is correct.
I have no further questions. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Is there any redirect?
When, just briefly, Your Honor, when Mr. Holmes was giving you just those short answers during the investigation, did you get the impression he wasn't cooperating, or whether he just, as you had seen before, he just didn't have much to say, he just didn't talk a lot?
He just didn't talk a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't have anything else.
Ms. Tisch-McGuire, do you have any recross?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
All right, and the jury does not have any questions for this witness. May this witness be released from her subpoena?
Yes, sir.
Any objection?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
Ms. Fournier, thank you.
Thank you.
Call your next witness, please.
Dr. Robert Hanlon.
Doctor, good morning.
Good morning.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
All right, please be seated. Please tell us your full name and spell your first, middle, and last names.
Robert E. Hanlon, R-O-B-E-R-T, E for Earl, E-A-R-L-E, Hanlon, H-A-N-L-O-N.
Mr. King, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Doctor, how are you employed, sir?
I am employed, I'm employed as a clinical neuropsychologist. I'm employed as a part-time basis as a consultant by Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine and Northwestern Memorial Hospital. And I'm also employed in my own practice, which is called Neuropsychological Associates of Chicago.
Okay. Were you present during the testimony of Dr. Rose Manguso yesterday?
Yes.
So you heard her description of what a neuropsychologist is, fair to say?
Yes.
And she was, I believe, testified that she was a board-certified clinical neuropsychologist, or excuse me, forensic neuropsychologist. No, I'm getting it wrong. She testified that she was a board-certified clinical neuropsychologist and a forensic psychologist. How do your board certifications differ from that? Are you the same as she, a board-certified clinical neuropsychologist?
Yes, I'm a board-certified clinical neuropsychologist.
Okay. Are you also a licensed psychologist?
Yes.
And as such, are you authorized to administer both neuropsychological instruments and psychological testing or instruments, like, for example, the type of personality testing that Dr. Gray administered in this case?
Yes.
You are not a board-certified forensic psychologist, though. Is that correct?
That is correct. I am not a board-certified forensic psychologist.
And why is that, sir?
I have not chosen to pursue that type of board certification. I'm a clinical neuropsychologist, and that is my area of specialization.
Okay. Is that because you've chosen to pursue other areas? It sounds like Dr. Manguso works at the State Forensic Hospital and does a lot of much of her work with forensic patients, and that was her testimony about why she underwent that board certification. What was your line of thinking? I mean, is it something you could go do if you wanted to do that?
Yes, certainly. I could pursue board certification in forensic psychology if I chose to. I have opted to spend my time and focus my career on conducting forensic research and teaching at a medical school in which now I do teach a course in forensic neuropsychology.
Okay. And is there even a such thing as a board certification in forensic neuropsychology?
No, there is not.
And so if you specialize in neuropsychology, there's no way to get some kind of forensic board certification for that?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. So what can you do if you specialize in neuropsychology in order to, you said you teach forensic neuropsychology at the medical school that you work at?
Yes, I teach a graduate course titled Forensic Neuropsychology and Psychology. I teach to graduate students in clinical psychology. The course is also available. Other psychiatry residents can take it. Forensic psychiatry fellows can take it. Neurology residents can take it if they choose to.
Okay. And I want to talk a little bit more about the types of actual clinical work that you've done and the experience that you have a little bit later. But first, can you tell us what other responsibilities do you have in your current capacity at the medical school? And what medical school is it again? Northwestern?
Yes, I'm at Northwestern University Medical Center in Chicago. Currently, I'm a senior neuropsychological consultant with the inpatient neuropsychological consultation service at Northwestern University Medical Center. It's approximately 1,000-bed inpatient medical center, and that my service conducts neuropsychological assessments on inpatients throughout the medical center, primarily inpatients that are referred from the Department of Neurology or Neurosurgery or Psychiatry or Internal Medicine or Geriatrics, etc. And I used to be the director of that service for 17 years. A couple of years ago I pulled back, and now I'm on that service about 1 week per month. And so I'm still actively involved in that service. I also periodically conduct neuropsychological evaluations in the forensic division of the Department of Psychiatry at Northwestern University Medical Center. And then the rest of my time is spent in my own practice. They're seeing clinical outpatients for neuropsychological evaluations or neuropsychological consultations, or taking referrals from attorneys or the court or insurance companies to do forensic neuropsychological or psychological evaluations.
Okay. In this service that you described at the hospital at Northwestern that you did for a number of years, large number of years, and you pulled back a little bit, did you in that capacity get referrals to do neuropsychological workups from all different types of doctors in that hospital?
Yes, my service would take referrals from any physician within the medical center, and that included a very diverse group of medical specialties and referrals for various reasons. But the lion's share of those referrals came from neurosurgeons, neurologists, psychiatrists, and internal medicine.
Okay. Suffice it to say that there could be a number of different reasons that different doctors might want to have this work done, not just in the context of psychiatry necessarily. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Can you give us an example of a type of referral that you might get that wouldn't be from a psychiatrist, for example?
Oh, certainly. Referrals from neurosurgery with patients with brain tumors who are being referred for an evaluation prior to surgery to resect their brain tumor in order to determine what their neuropsychological status is prior to the surgery. Patients with stroke are referred by neurologists, for example. Patients with various types of dementia, Alzheimer's dementia, vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia, for example, referred by internal medicine docs or various other specializations. Also take referrals from transplant services to determine what the mental status is of an individual that is a candidate for an organ transplant, heart transplant, for example, liver transplant. Those are some examples.
Okay. Did you hear Dr. Manguso's testimony yesterday where she said that when I asked her to compare the work that she did at the Spaulding Rehabilitation Hospital and at the Cottle Mental Health Institute at Pueblo, a clinical versus a forensic setting, in terms of applying or administering these neuropsychological tests that you do you agree with her testimony that you basically do it the same way no matter what discipline the referral comes from? Is that fair to say?
Yes, the tests are, there's a large number of neuropsychological tests that are available to use, but there is a standard administration protocol that you must adhere to in order to generate a valid test result. And so yes, in answer to your question, the tests are administered in the same way regardless of what condition the patient has or what the reason for the referral is.
And is that because you're basically looking at a pretty isolated issues with regard to their cognition, and that's really it? Fair to say, or? Right.
The objective is to determine objectively what the cognitive status of that individual is at that point in time.
Okay. I want to go through a little bit what kind of education you have to reach this position that you've reached. Do you have an undergraduate degree, and if so, what's that in?
Yes, I have an undergraduate degree from Indiana University in occupational therapy.
And did you then get a PhD?
I did get a PhD. I had 2 master's degrees prior to the PhD. I achieved a PhD in psychology from the City University of New York.
Tell us about the master's degrees, please, sir.
My first master's degree was from Southern Illinois University in rehabilitation counseling, and then my second master's degree was in psychology from the City University of New York en route to the completion of my PhD.
Why did you then decide to go on and get the PhD?
Because that was part of my academic and professional plan from when I was in high school. So it was just a number of steps along the way in previous degrees in order to prepare me to pursue doctoral level education in neuropsychology.
And what did kind of, how long did that doctoral training take, the PhD, for you to get your PhD?
It took between 4 to 5 years.
And did you do some kind of postdoctoral training, or
Yes.
where did you go from there?
Sorry. Yes, I then completed a postdoctoral fellowship in clinical neuropsychology at UCLA Medical Center at the Neuropsychiatric Institute at UCLA in Los Angeles.
And what kind of employment have you had? You've had a number of different jobs, but can you run through what your various employment has been following your postdoctoral training?
Certainly. After I left UCLA, I took a position as chief neuropsychologist at the Baylor Institute for Rehabilitation at Baylor University Medical Center in Dallas. And I was in that position for approximately 3 years. At that point, then I was offered a position as director of neuropsychology in the Department of Neurology at Washington University Medical School and Washington University Medical Center in St. Louis. And I then moved to St. Louis and worked in that position then for, again, approximately 3 years. And then at that point, I then was offered a position as the director of inpatient neuropsychology at Northwestern University Medical Center and academic appointment at Northwestern University Medical School.
Okay. Were some of those previous appointments also teaching appointments?
Yes.
Where did you teach at?
Yes, I taught a course titled Clinical Neuropsychology at the University of Texas Southwest Medical Center Medical School in Dallas while I was while my clinical position was at Baylor in Dallas. Then I was I was a assistant professor of neurology and neurologic surgery and psychology at Washington University School of Medicine. And then when I went to Northwestern, initially I was assistant professor of psychiatry and neurology. And then a few years after I was at Northwestern, I was then promoted to associate professor of psychiatry and neurology, and I've remained at that academic level since then.
Okay. Assistant to associate, do you have is there something higher than that? I don't know.
There is one academic level above that, which is professor, what's often referred to as full professor. I've not applied to date for that appointment. I will, and I'll probably do that within the next couple of years.
Now, in the course of these various positions that you've held at the various institutions, have you also engaged in research as well, and if so, into what areas?
Yes. Earlier in my career, when I was at UCLA and Baylor and also at Washington University, I focused on neuropsychological aspects of what's called in my field focal lesions in adults, and that typically involve stroke and brain tumor, but also I focused on more diffuse brain injuries that at that point the research focused on traumatic brain injuries. And so that was the research focus during the early course of my career when I was at those institutions, and did a number of studies and published many empirical research articles on those topics. Also looking at recovery of cognitive function following these different types of brain damage, and also with kind of a rehabilitation focus. After I went to Northwestern, I continued with my interest in research in traumatic brain injury, but started to focus more on aspects of the neuropsychology of violence, and then that then evolved into my current research agenda, which I am the director of the Forensic Neuropsychology Lab at Northwestern Medical Center, and our focus is, one of our primary research focuses is looking at neuropsychological aspects of violent criminal offenders.
Are there other doctors there that are then part of your program conducting research in those areas and other similar areas?
Yes.
And this jury has heard some because of Mr. Holmes' matriculation into the University of Colorado, has learned some about how that graduate program works with regard to neurology. Do you do a similar kind of thing there, where you would apply for grant money and get the grant, write the grant, and get the grant money, and then actually set up a study or something, and then do the study, and then publish the findings of the study afterwards? Is that how the process works, generally speaking?
That is the standard process of research in academia, is applying for funding, trying to obtain funding, acquiring funding, and then conducting studies that are based on the application of that funding.
And then the publications that you then issue at the end, are those peer-reviewed publications?
Yes.
And what is a peer-reviewed publication?
A peer-reviewed publication is a publication which the process is as follows. You write a manuscript describing the intent of the study, the methodology of the study, the results of the study, and your interpretation of that study. That then is submitted to a peer-referenced journal. And then that manuscript then is reviewed by at least 2, if not 3, if not more, members of the editorial board of that journal, and they determine whether it's a good fit for that journal, whether it's acceptable, whether it's good research or not, and then they provide feedback and usually criticisms about the study and how the manuscript may need to be changed, or maybe what additional research needs to be conducted to enhance it. And then the authors then typically try to make those revisions and resubmit it, and then it's a back and forth, and eventually, most of the time, the manuscript is eventually accepted for publication in that journal, and then within a few months or a year or so, it is published.
How many? And have you also been published in other journal articles and things that may not necessarily relate to a specific study that you're doing, but may just be an article that you write about a certain topic that you have expertise in? Do you do that as well?
Yes.
Are all of your publications covered in, as well as the rest of your history and your current CV that you provided for us?
Yes.
Have you published any books?
Yes.
What books have you published?
Most recently, I published a book about a family mass murderer. The book is titled "Survived by One: The Life and Mind of a Family Mass Murderer," and it is I think it's a objective analysis of an individual who committed a extremely heinous multiple domestic homicide, family homicide, when he was 18, and it's a detailed analysis of that case and that individual.
Okay. Other books that you published?
Previously, I published a book. It's more of a theoretical book about cognitive processing. Many years ago, it was an edited book. I edited that book.
Okay. You also said that you have a private practice on the side in Chicago there, and you take referrals, you said, from insurance companies and lawyers and courts. Is that right?
Yes.
And what are those referrals to do? What are you asked to do in those referrals? Is there a variety of things? Are there a variety of things?
Yes, there are a variety of things. Some are disability evaluations, similar to what Dr. Manguso was referring to yesterday, what she used to do. And there are often referrals from insurance companies or case managers to determine the presence, extent, severity of disability of a given individual. There are also referrals from attorneys who work in the civil justice system, so personal injury attorneys, workers' compensation attorneys, both from the plaintiff side and from the defense side.
How about criminal cases?
And then also criminal cases, yes.
Have you been retained by defense lawyers then?
Yes.
Have you been retained by any prosecutors before?
I have not. I've testified for the prosecution on one occasion. I was not technically retained by the prosecution.
Okay. Have you been appointed by courts or asked by courts to conduct evaluations?
Yes.
How many times do you think?
I've been appointed by the probate court, judges in probate court in Chicago, I would say approximately 12 times, I believe.
Ever in a criminal case or no?
I've been court appointed in a criminal case.
Have you been qualified as an expert in the field of clinical neuropsychology before and testified in that capacity as an expert?
Yes.
And how many times do you think you've testified as an expert, a qualified expert in that area in a court of law?
In a court general and not just criminal? In general, I think approximately maybe 48 times.
Okay. How many in the criminal? Do you have any idea?
In criminal, I believe I've been qualified 27 times.
Okay. And was one of those times the time that you were called by the prosecution to testify?
Yes.
How many neuropsychological evaluations do you think you've done in your entire career, sir? And just a wild guess. No, not a wild guess. An approximation, an estimate.
I understand. Given the fact that over the course of my career, I've seen a very large number of inpatients, patients that are hospitalized, I would estimate that over a period of 23 to 24 years of seeing inpatients, probably either conducted or supervised neuropsychological evaluations of inpatients, approximately 6,000 times.
Okay.
With regard to outpatients, again, over the same period of time, I would estimate 3,000 to 4,000 times.
Okay. Have you done neuropsychological evaluations of murder defendants before?
Yes.
How many do you think you've done?
I've done approximately 200.
Have you done neuropsychological evaluations of murder defendants who ended up being diagnosed with schizophrenia? And if so, how many?
Yes, I have. Approximately 30.
Okay. So it sounds like in criminal cases, you have been primarily retained by the defense. Is that fair?
Yes, I'm almost exclusively retained by the defense.
Is that by design, or is that just the way that it's kind of... Do you just take the cases as they come to you and decide if you want to work on it or not?
I do. I do take the cases and decide whether I think I'm the best, a good person or the right person for that particular case or that particular attorney to conduct the evaluation. I've certainly offered my services to prosecutors in various jurisdictions, but they've not referred cases to me.
Okay. Now, I want to talk more about later about your involvement in this case, but suffice it to say, in this case, were you ever asked to assess Mr. Holmes' sanity?
No.
Okay. Have you done that before, though? Have you done sanity evaluations before?
Yes.
And how many times do you think you've assessed someone's sanity?
I would estimate that in the context, the referrals that I get typically involve conducting a neuropsychological evaluation, and then attorneys often will ask, well, would you also assess fitness, or would you also assess sanity in the context of the neuropsychological evaluation you do? So the neuropsychological component is the fundamental reason for the referral to me,
okay.
Typically. That's at least my perception of it. So in that context, with that preface, I would estimate that if I've conducted sanity assessments, I would estimate in terms of criminal defendants, not just murder defendants, but criminal defendants, probably 100 times.
Okay. How many mass murderers have you done neuropsychological evaluations of?
22 total.
Okay. And how is there does the FBI or someone else define what a mass murder is, or is there a definition of that?
There is a definition. There are two definitions that are used. The definition I think is the most widely used is that comes from the FBI. It's published in the Crime Classification Manual that's authored by John Douglas, who's a former FBI profiler, and that definition requires the murder of 4 or more individuals at a single location at a single point in time. That's how the FBI classifies a mass murder. There's also another definition that is out there and is in the literature. It was originally developed by a forensic psychiatrist named Park Dietz in 1986, I believe, which includes 3 or more victims at a given location at one point in time. So the 22 that I just mentioned includes individuals from both of those definitions.
Okay. I want to run through just once again, maybe a little bit more thoroughly, what are your current licensures, and what are your board certifications? So
Certainly.
We're clear.
Certainly. I am currently licensed as a clinical psychologist in Illinois and also in Missouri and in Texas. And I am board certified as a clinical neuropsychologist and have been since 1995. I have no other board certifications.
Okay. And have you ever sought to testify in court and have a judge say that you were not qualified to testify as an expert in the area of clinical neuropsychology in the couple hundred times that you've testified?
No.
Judge, what exhibit are we up to at this point, if I may?
Defense exhibit?
Yes, sir.
91, I think. Did you say 91? Did you say 91? Yeah, 91. I remember 90 yesterday. D-TR-91.
I'm marking this D-TR-91, and I'm handing a copy to Mr. Brockler here. If I can approach
You
the
can.
witness, Your Honor. Sir, I'm handing you what I've marked as D-TR-91. Do you identify that?
Yes, it's a copy of my CV.
And is that an accurate copy of your most recent CV as far as you can tell?
Yes.
Does that contain everything you've ever done in your entire career?
No.
No. Is it an overview of your career and the publications and research that you've done?
Yes.
Judge, I've moved the admission of DTR 97.
I think 91.
91. I'll do 97 later.
All right, Mr. Brocker, do you have any objection to D-TR-91?
No, Your Honor, I do not.
All right, without objection, it is admitted.
And Judge, at this time, I would move to qualify Dr. Hanlon as an expert in the area of clinical neuropsychology under Rule 702 and SHREC.
Is there any objection, Mr. Brockler?
What dear, Your Honor?
You may.
Sorry. Dump water on myself here.
Morning, Mr. Brockler.
I want to ask you to... I apologize for that to the court and to you, sir. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I want to explore some of the areas that you spoke with Mr. King about that provide the basis for the area of expertise you wish to testify in, okay?
Okay.
First thing I want to reaffirm, though, are a couple things. I can't remember if they were asked. You're not a medical doctor, fair?
That's correct.
And because you're not a medical doctor, you're not a psychiatrist, correct?
Correct.
And I guess that automatically means you must not be a forensic psychiatrist.
That's correct.
You're not a forensic psychologist like Dr. Manguso was, fair?
Correct.
And so that we understand, a forensic psychologist is someone who is applying the science of psychology, and I can't remember if there's medicine in there, to the areas of law that are covered in specific areas of law and questions of law that are covered in court, correct?
That's true.
It's not sufficient to just say, well, I'm testifying about psychology, therefore it's forensic, correct?
True.
Now, when we talk about testimony, Mr. King asked you some questions about for whom you've testified. Do you remember that?
He did.
And I want to make sure that we understand your experience testifying as an expert in clinical neuropsychology, okay?
Okay.
First off, it does not appear that you have been appointed by a court ever in a criminal case to provide your services. Is that fair?
That's true.
Tell us what probate is. You said you've been appointed by probate. What's that?
Okay. Probate is it's often referred to as one of the specialty courts, and it the primary focus of the probate court involves wills, and in terms of the determination of the existence of a will, who are the heirs that are designated, whether the will is legal or not, and whether or not the individual that produced the will was mentally capable of designating where their assets should go. So in probate, the issues are typically ones of mental competency, and whether or not someone has a guardian or not, and whether they have what's called testamentary capacity, whether they are capable of understanding a will, understanding where their assets should go, etc. And those issues can come up when people, not just the elderly, or not people who are just demented, but also people with traumatic brain injuries, people who have intellectual impairment. There's a lot of different types of cases.
Thank you. None of those issues, of course, come into play in what you're going to do for us in this case. Fair?
True.
And to be clear, the issues that a criminal court deals with that you're aware of, at least in the area of mental health, involve competency, sanity, sometimes fitness, those types of issues. Fair?
True.
And you've never been appointed by a court to provide an opinion on those things.
Right.
Let's take a look, though, at you do have some testimonial history here on the criminal side, correct?
I do.
And you think you've testified how many times, sir, as an expert in a criminal case?
27, I believe.
27? Okay. This is what I have going off of the information that we have about you. And if I misstate something, you tell me that, hey, I don't think that sounds right, okay?
Okay.
I have down that you have testified in 2 criminal hearings that had nothing to do with murder, and we'll keep moving. There's more than that. I'm not just saying 2. There's at least 2 of these times you've testified were for hearings on criminal matters that were not related to murder or capital murder. Does that sound about right?
I think there's probably more than that, but that's, there are a small number of those.
When we get through these numbers, if you don't think it adds up, you can go ahead and look through the list you provided, and we'll get there.
Okay.
I have down that you have testified 3 times in criminal trials that don't have anything to do with murder or capital murder. Does that sound right?
Yes.
I have down that you've testified in about 6 criminal hearings on murder or capital murder cases. Fair?
Sounds right.
I have that you've testified 7 times in murder trials. Fair?
Sounds right.
And another 7 times in capital murder trials. Correct?
I believe so.
And capital murder, so that we're clear, is that one that could potentially carry the death penalty?
True.
All right. Now, I don't know what that adds up to, sir, but I've got about 25 or so. If there's a couple missing in there, you let me know. But that sounds about right, correct?
It does.
And it is fair to say that in every single one of those cases, and we'll get to the one you talked about with the prosecution, you have testified exclusively for the criminal defendant accused of the crime.
True.
Now, in the case where you said you testified at once for the prosecution, to be clear, you were not testifying against the defendant about his or her mental health, correct?
That's true.
So, can we be more accurate? And when you say, almost exclusively I testify for criminal defendants, can we drop the almost and make it exclusively?
That's fair.
For criminal defendants? And you said to Mr. King, hey, that just happens. I mean, I'd testify for anybody, but it's really just the criminal defense that's seeking my services. Was it something like that, or?
I think that was the exchange.
Let's talk about why it is that you may have been exclusively retained by defense attorneys. And before I do that, let's drill down a little bit more on that. Almost entirely, in terms of capital murder and murder, you are testifying for the public defender's office. Is that fair?
Yes.
And in fact, you're not new to the public defenders in this case, correct?
True.
You were hired previously by Miss Brady for another criminal case here in Colorado, fair?
Right.
Now let's talk about how it is that you come to be exclusively a criminal defense expert. Now your curriculum vitae that's been admitted into evidence, which I believe is Exhibit 91, correct?
Yes.
Here's what I've done. I've gone through and tried to figure out, and you've put in there the conferences that you've provided presentations at, fair?
Yes.
And in part, let's talk about the CV. You said it doesn't include everything that you do, but to be honest, it includes the things that you think are most important for people like this jury and this court to consider in weighing your expertise. Is that fair?
I think that's fair.
Okay. So along those lines, you've put down the conferences that you have taught at, correct?
Yes, where I've done a presentation, yes.
Lectures, let's
Yes.
say. And so I want to ask you about some of the groups that you've lectured to. Now, what I have down here is, and you really didn't start doing criminal work until about 2003. Is that fair?
I think I had done probably a couple of criminal cases before 2003, but yes, that's about the time frame.
Was 2003 when you started to lecture for criminal defense organizations?
That sounds about right.
Okay, well, let's go through that. Since 2003, what I have down is you have provided 7 separate lectures for the Cook County Public Defender's Office. Does that sound right?
Sure.
5 for the National Legal Aid and Defenders Association, right?
That's correct.
Those are 2 big organizations for you, aren't they, Doctor?
Big organizations. Certainly the Cook County Public Defender's Office is a organization that contacts me and retains me on a regular basis.
A lot. And that relationship is important to you, isn't it?
It is.
And so is your relationship with the National Legal Aid and Defender Association. Would you agree with that?
Is it important? It's not as important. If they ask me to do a presentation, I usually agree to do it.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Sir, I'm handing you, I'm sorry, Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Sir, I'm handing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 1258. Take a look at that, and if you recognize it, tell us what you think it is.
I believe this is my profile from the Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine website.
And you'd agree with me that that's what it looks like as far as you know today, as if I printed that off this morning.
Probably.
Okay, and that's your picture up there in the upper left-hand corner, right?
It is.
There is a space that is revealed called disclosures. Do you see that?
Yes.
And under disclosures, there are 3 areas to list: industry relationships, academic and other professional activities, and external professional relationships. Fair?
Yes.
Judge, may we approach? I have an objection.
Yes. right? The objection is overruled.
Doctor, do you remember my last question?
The question was, what is this document?
No, sir, we'd gotten past that, and that's okay,
Okay,
because there was a break. My question was, there are 3 areas that are listed under the disclosures that you put on this profile. One is industry relationships, one is academic and other professional activities, and the third is external professional relationships. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that's all accurate, correct?
Yes.
And fair to say then that the, first off, I'm going to move to admit People's Exhibit, is it 1258, Doctor? Forgive me.
1258.
1258 into evidence, Your Honor.
Is there any objection, Mr. King?
So I would object as hearsay.
Mr. Brockler?
Your Honor, he's stated that this is his profile page, and he admits that the information on here is accurate and his.
I'll defer ruling on that. You can proceed with your questions.
Thank you, Judge. Sir, under academic or other professional activities, you list only 2. Is that fair?
Yes.
And those 2 are, go ahead and read them to us.
The 2 that are listed here are Law Office of Public Defender, parentheses, Cook County Government, close parentheses. Second, National Legal Aid and Defender Association, open parentheses, NLADA, close parentheses.
Thank you. So those 2 organizations we've talked about, you've also provided training to the federal public defenders, correct?
Yes.
And you've provided training to the Illinois appellate public defenders, is that correct?
True.
Let's drill down on what some of the training you provided these public defender organizations are. You have provided annual trainings on defending Illinois death penalty cases. You've done that before, correct?
Yes.
You've done it in 2005.
Yes.
You've done it 2 times in 2006.
Yes.
You did it in 2007,
Yes.
2008,
Yes.
2009,
Yes.
2010,
Yes.
and then you stopped teaching for that conference because they stopped having that conference, right?
They stopped having that conference because they no longer have a death penalty.
That's right. Otherwise, you've taught for the Defending Death Penalty Cases Conference 7 of the last possible 7 times you could have taught for, correct?
True.
Now, there's other conferences you've taught at. One is a conference called Everything You Need to Know About Handling a Death Penalty Case, correct?
Can you direct me to where that is?
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Must be old.
Sir, can I take a look at this?
And for the record, Mr. Brockler, you're looking at his CV, is that correct?
Correct, Your Honor. I'm looking at DTR 91. Here it is. Right there. Thank you. Sorry.
Oh, it's a subtitle. Yes, that is correct.
And you've taught at a conference called Jury Persuasion for Life, a capital case training. 2008, sir. Take a look at that.
That's correct.
And that was a conference about for defense attorneys handling death penalty cases, right?
Yes, Cook County Public Defender.
Yeah. And then you've also taught recently at a conference called, another death penalty conference called Life in the Balance, right?
Yes.
That was also for criminal defense attorneys who handle death penalty cases, correct?
True.
What I did not see anywhere in your curriculum vitae were any conferences that you taught for prosecutors. Did you omit those from your CV?
No.
Because you've never provided training like this for prosecutors?
True.
You mentioned having done neuropsychological testing on 22 mass murderers. Do you recall that?
Yes.
You draw a distinction between mass murderers who commit them domestically, and what I mean by that is familial or people in the household, that sort of thing. There's a difference between that and other kinds of mass murder. You'd agree with that?
Yes.
Of those 22, how many were domestic?
Can I look at my records?
Yes, sir, if that will help you remember. And all you have to do, doctor, if you would, is
Yes.
just tell us what you're looking at, and we'll just put it on the record. That's fine.
What I'm looking at is a handwritten list of mass murderers whom I have conducted neuropsychological evaluations of over the years, and from my memory and looking at this list, 10 of the 22 were domestic homicides.
So 12 were not domestic?
Yes.
And give us a sense of what the breakdown is if there's anything else about those 12. We've got domestic for 10. Are the 12 just other, miscellaneous? What do we do with those?
No, I think they are they're classifiable.
Tell us what those classifications are.
2 are gang-related mass murders.
That's not applicable here. Fair?
True.
Okay.
At least 2 are revenge-based mass murders.
Also not present here. Fair?
True. Four, I believe, would be, I'm blocking on the term right now, I'm sorry. They are mass murders that are committed in the course of committing another felony crime, such as robbery, home invasion, that type of thing.
Not present here.
Right. And the others then, there are a couple that are sex-driven crimes.
Couple meaning 2, 3, 1?
Two maximum.
Not applicable here. Fair? That's true, right, doctor? That it's not applicable here?
True, yes, sorry.
Sorry.
You have the tally?
That adds up to 10 by my count.
I'm still missing 2.
Maybe.
I think probably one of the other ones is also a felony, what's classified as a felony murder, meaning that it was a mass murder committed in the context of another crime, which is a robbery.
Fair to say we can bump that 4 up to a 5 then? That puts us at 11. We got 1 left.
Exactly. And then the one that remains is a crime that involved the murder of a woman and her 2 children in order to cut a fetus, a 9-month-old fetus, from her because one of the offenders wanted another baby. And I don't really know how to classify that.
Understood. It sounds like, though, between domestic and these other specific motive-related crimes, whether it's gangs, revenge, other felonies, sex, or this last one that you talked about, you have not ever done a neuropsychological evaluation of a mass murderer engaged in a crime like this.
True.
Of those 22 that you've done, how many of them did you do, not 22, let's cut out the domestic ones, of the others that weren't domestic, how many did you do before they were convicted of their crime?
Twelve.
12 of the 12 not domestic? All 12?
Yes, the 12 that are not domestic, correct.
The 10 domestic ones you did after they were convicted?
Most of the domestic were done after they were convicted. I'm sorry, it's hard for me to keep count without writing here.
But let's leave it at this. You have never done a neuropsychological evaluation on a defendant quite like this, accused of the crimes that he's been accused of with this fact pattern. Fair?
True.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, I do not have an objection to this witness being qualified as an expert exclusively in the area of clinical neuropsychology.
All right. Without objection, then, and pursuant to Rule 702 of the Colorado Rules of Evidence in the decision in People versus Schreck, which is cited at 22 Pacific 3rd, 68, Colorado, 2001, the court will accept Dr. Hanlon as an expert witness in the field of clinical neuropsychology. Members of the jury, that means that he may now render expert opinions in that field. You're not bound by the testimony of a witness who testifies as an expert. The credibility of an expert's testimony is to be considered as that of any other witness. You may believe all of an expert witness's testimony, part of it or none of it. The weight that you give the testimony is entirely your decision. All right, Mr. King, you may proceed for another 5 minutes or so before we take our morning break,
Okay.
unless you want to take it now.
Whatever the court prefers.
Let's go ahead and take it now so that I don't interrupt you just 5 minutes from now. Members of the jury, please make sure you keep all my admonitions in mind during the break. All of them apply. All of them are mandatory. Let's take 20 minutes. I'll see you back here at 10:25. Thank you. The jury has exited the courtroom. Please be seated, everyone. Let's take our morning break. I'll see everyone back here at 10:25. The court will be in recess. Thank you.
Please rise.